I think you'd all agree, 3 terrific speakers. Thank you, gentlemen. Right, we have a number of questions from the audience here, which I'm going to address to the panel. We're going to get through as many as we possibly can, but obviously there is time dictation. So the first question is, if I can direct this to Stephen, if we leave, would we have control over our borders and laws, or would we be overruled by European courts?
Well, the answer to that is simply yes, we would. Absolutely. As Nigel said, we would no longer have the power of a European court to decide on our own borders, on our own laws. It would be down to the Supreme Court. And it would be up to the country to be able to vote in an organisation or a party that actually could implement the best possible ethical migration system that works for this country. Now, we believe it should be an Australian points-based system, and an Australian points-based system would allow in those who have the talent and the skills that we need for the country going forward to compete in the globe. And no one in Europe will be able to stop us then, because we have the power, we have the control, and they have just lost it.
A question from Neil Lanson. Recent polls have suggested that the forthcoming referendum will be a close thing. Major politicians of the 2 main parties and several well-known industry leaders are very pro staying in the EU. Clearly, they see major advantages in being members. What disadvantages do you foresee in achieving a no result in the referendum? If I can put this to you, Paul.
A no result, does that leave or remain? Okay, well, the advantages of leaving are simply this. We could have a bonfire of EU laws and do away with most of them. We'd be able to make our own laws once again and ensure that the people who make those laws are our politicians at Westminster. If you don't like the laws that they make, you can vote them out after 5 years. You cannot get rid of unelected, faceless European commissioners. We get control of our fisheries back. We get control of our borders, as Stephen said, an Australian points-based system. We could spend our taxes on our people in our country, which is, I'm sure, what you all want, isn't it? As Nigel said, we'd be able to re-engage with our friends in the Commonwealth, and we will be able to sign our own trade deals and re-engage with the rest of the world. Now, the disadvantages of remaining are even bigger. You know, even greater union would speed up the migrant crisis that we've got at the moment. 1 million people came to the continent from the Middle East and North Africa last year. They're estimating that it could be somewhere between 4 million and 10 million this year alone. Look at what happens in Cologne. Within 4 or 5 years, all of those men will get German passports, which is in effect an EU passport, which means they could come here to our country. Turkey will join the European Union eventually. Cameron, Tim Farron, and indeed Jeremy Corbyn all want to see this happen down the line. Only 3% of Turkey is actually in Europe. It has lower wages than any other EU state. And in fact, one of the great arguments that is put forward in favour of the European Union by those who want to remain is that it helps with security. How can it help with security if Turkey join? Turkey borders with Iran, Syria and Iraq, not countries that necessarily like our way of life. And finally, if we do remain, we will be sucked in to a European army. In fact, when Nigel said this in 2014 to Nick Clegg basically said that you were talking nonsense, that this wasn't on the table, that it was Fantasy Island. We now hear on a regular basis Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the European Commission, and his sidekick, Frans Timmermans, talk openly about the need of an EU army. We should have nothing to do with it, ladies and gentlemen. We should retain our own armed forces.
Chairman, James.
Yeah.
Can I just pick up 2 points? Firstly, Paul's point about the army, the European army, but also the European foreign policy.
Yes.
You'll notice now on issue after issue, there is no British voice in terms of foreign policy. We think we're happy to do it at a European level. And I suspect that's actually rather dangerous, because I think that the dominant voices in the European Union, and we're not one of them, will have different foreign policy aims around the world to us. And how interesting that George Galloway, who is somewhat to the left of the political spectrum, you might agree, and who you may not think would traditionally be an ally of the four of us on this platform this evening. But anybody that watched Galloway on BBC Sunday Politics yesterday, if you get the chance, play it back, he said, look, I am very much from the left of politics, but I believe that Britain should make its own laws. I believe that Britain should decide its own immigration policy. He said, and I want no part of a European foreign policy. I believe Britain should determine its own foreign policy. And isn't it interesting that this issue is so big that it brings together people on the left and the centre and the right of politics? This is not about left and right, it's about right and wrong. And that's what we must tell everybody out there.
One for you, Nigel. I think you'll enjoy this one.
Oh, well, there we are. Is it a long hop?
No. Do you envisage any situation where the major broadcasters and David Cameron will allow a debate between you and the Prime Minister?
Well, I mean, the one thing we know for certain is that the Prime Minister, or Dave, as he likes to style himself, and not wearing a tie and being cool and all that sort of thing. The one thing we know is that the Prime Minister hates television debates. In 2010, there are many things that it actually cost them the general election, and when we were in Manchester last year for the leaders' debates, he certainly wasn't enjoying the evening and couldn't wait for the whole thing to be over. I think things have changed. They changed in America way before us with that first Nixon-Kennedy debate all the way back in the early 60s. I now think that the populace absolutely demand, when there are national elections or a key referendum, they demand a debate, or actually, better perhaps, a series of debates. And I don't think the Prime Minister can chicken out of this one, whether he wants to or not. The question is, who should debate him? Now, what we've got now, and it's not been easy for the last couple of weeks, what we've got now is a coming together of people in this campaign. Some of you may have seen there was a meeting in Manchester on Friday, and in fact Paul is wearing the tie. Can you see the tie, ladies and gentlemen? Isn't it stylish and lovely?
I won't get knocked over.
Now that is the Go tie, and around the Go banner there are people coming together. So, the other night we had Kate Hoey from the Labour Party, we had David Davis, Conservative, myself and Louise Bors from UKIP. So there is a coming together. And frankly, who from our side of the argument takes on the Prime Minister? Frankly, I think there are probably 3 or 4 of us that will contend to do it. And I'm quite happy if we put it to a poll, ask the people. But you know what? If I get the chance, and if I'm the one that's picked to take on Dave, I shall look forward to it enormously. That's what they want to do. No, I know. It's quite funny, actually.
One for you, Stephen. UKIP is in favour of free trade when we leave the EU and develop our own manufacturing industry again. How can we compete with China? It seems to me that Britain needs to return to that of a leader in innovation.
Well, we're already competing with countries across the world. Just already look at the service sectors that are doing well. Just look at our biotechnology, oil and industry, financial services. Just look at the way that we're moving on in television, in radio and music and arts and sports. But where we are lacking and where we are falling behind is indeed manufacturing. And it's because of the European Union that we're falling behind in manufacturing. People have lost their jobs in the northeast of England and in Wales because of disastrous EU policies on energies that make us subsidise wind farms, offshore and onshore, to ensure that we have high electricity prices over there. We have lost jobs in fishing. We have lost jobs in coal. We have lost jobs in the manufacturing industry because of high regulations that have come down from the European Union that benefit German companies and French companies and northern Italian companies to our cost. So if we want to have our manufacturing businesses back, if we want to see the small and medium-sized manufacturing business survive, then we need to leave the European Union to tell them that we will have our own regulations that work for us in this country, that can compete in other countries, and yes, if they want to trade in Europe, they can do with their regulations, but we will have freedom and the ability for our people with the skills that we have to compete on the global stage. We want to compete with China, bring it on. We're already doing very well in India, South America, Americas, and the rest of the world, and they're buying a lot more goods from us now.
Yeah, I agree with that, Steve. I agree with Stephen, and I agree with the tenor of the question too about innovation. The EU's energy policy has been a disaster, but let's be fair, made even worse by George Osborne. George Osborne's carbon floor has made us uncompetitive, not just against America and China and India, but uncompetitive against France and Germany too. So we really have been dealing our own manufacturing industry is a terrible blow. But there's one thing I would say that we need to do, certainly when we leave the European Union, even if we stayed in the European Union, which I pray we don't, but there's one thing that we really are missing a trick on here, that engineering has now become so unfashionable that we're producing so few engineers that genuinely engineering companies need to employ foreign labour because we have a massive skill shortage in this area, and we have to do something, and it has to start in the schools from the ages of 14 and 15, where we have to encourage young men and women to study fewer ologies and to actually get out there and start learning some trades and skills that we need in this country.
One for you, Paul, as a Liverpool lad and a northerner. Is there anything that would benefit the working man by staying in the EU?
By staying in the EU? No, not particularly. Quite a short answer, actually. Look, the legislation which has been brought about in this country, workers' rights and whatnot, could have been passed down by a British government. Easy enough. Okay? There is nothing the European Union has done that couldn't have been done via London. If we do stay in, we know that even more people will come to this country and we'll have no control. We know that wages will continue to stagnate. We know that working class people will continue to be driven off-site. We're talking about electricians, plumbers, builders, who can't compete, particularly with Eastern Europeans, who in some cases are living maybe 5, 6, 7 men to a house and sending their money back to Poland. So the money actually doesn't stay within the British economy. If the working man in Britain wants to rise once again, we must do so outside the European Union as a free, independent, democratic nation. We can do it, ladies and gentlemen.
Nigel, if we stay in the EU, would you ever envisage us changing to the euro in 2020?
I don't think the euro will exist in 2020 in its current form. And isn't this the other thing that has not yet been said in this debate, not just here tonight, but in the country? We're being asked by the Prime Minister to remain a member of a club whose accounts have not been signed off by the auditors for 20 years in a row, whose currency has brought misery to tens of millions of people in the Mediterranean, and whose migration policy is such a total and complete shambles that it actually threatens social order in some northern European countries. This is our chance to get out, to get off the Titanic and into a lifeboat that is called HMS United Kingdom. Yeah, why not?
Chairman, if I can just add two little points here. Nigel has made it absolutely clear that this isn't just about the status quo of staying in the European Union, it's about what will move on, what will enhance. And yes, they are, and they do want us to join the euro. And they do want us to have a European army. But let's look at the things as I sit on the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee in Europe. They're talking about a single corporation tax for every business in Europe run by the European Commission. Only last week, they talked about the removal of VAT exemptions in the United Kingdom on food and clothes. And then suddenly, when they realised how damaging it was for the referendum, they've hit tax, controlled by businesses. So be wary where they will go. You can stop it right now.
But the other argument, too. Quite important, actually.
Stories on BBC Radio Manchester earlier, etc., will have to be relocated in the UK. I know you covered this slightly.
Yeah, but I'll touch it again. Well, the scare stories on Manchester Radio was that Nigel was coming up the M6, I suppose. I don't know. And bringing the weather with him. Or is it always like this up here? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, look, I think the Prime Minister is in big trouble. Let's be honest. The single biggest issue in British politics is immigration, open borders, and our lack of control. All right? I mean, this was something, that we were talking about years ago, and we took an absolute shed load of abuse for daring to even touch on the territory. But now, 8 out of 10 British people believe that open borders are wholly unacceptable and that something must be done. And the whole point is that for Cameron to have succeeded with his renegotiation, he needed to convince the British people that he'd won a concession that would reduce the numbers of migrants that would come to this country. It is perfectly clear with his so-called handbrake, he's perfectly clear with his emergency brake that he's failed to do any such thing. So he's now in trouble. He's now on the back foot and he's panicking, frankly, and that is why he said that if we can't control, if we don't stay in the European Union, our borders will come back to Dover and we'll finish up with migrant camps like they have in Calais. We're being given a scare story, ladies and gentlemen, by a Prime Minister who in 2 manifestos has promised us he would reduce immigration to tens of thousands a year, and it is running at 1,300,000 plus a year, and they're the ones that we know about. We're being told to be scared of a change of policy by a Prime Minister whose immigration policy is an even bigger failure than Blair's, because Blair did it deliberately. I suggest we don't listen to this level of failure. He's trying to scare us. We are an island nation. And if our border comes from Calais to Dover, we will protect our borders and we will say to people who've no right to be here, you can't come in.
One for all three of you, given the area that we live in here in the Northwest. Do our Commonwealth economic migrants suffer due to EU migrant numbers?
You do that, Steve.
Yeah. The answer is absolutely clear. I mean, I'm not going to go into my family background. Many of you already know that I've got Commonwealth, people from Commonwealth, and we work with them. And only last week, as we said, I was on the television with David Lammy, who was suggesting that those who had fought with us in the Commonwealth actually, would actually be voting to stay in the European Union. If you look at the numbers on there, you can look at the fact that black community in Manchester, or Hume and Moss Side where I was from, they're not in the 1% and the 5%, but they're just like ordinary families like here in this audience today. They're the ones struggling to make ends meet. They're the ones finding it difficult to pay their electricity and gas bills because they're being pushed down by low wages caused by large-scale migration into this country. They're having their jobs displaced just like everybody else. And they will understand that if they want to have freedom in this country, they want to be able to have what everybody else does, then they need to control migration in this country first, and they will with us, and they'll back us, and they'll be supporting of us. And that is what makes this country great, because we are all really in it together, but we're in it together against a European elite who want it all for them and not for us.
Yeah. And again, Chairman, this is all about perspectives. After 1945, there was a strong feeling amongst British governments that actually we did owe quite a big debt to quite a lot of these Commonwealth, as the Empire became the Commonwealth, we did owe quite a big debt for reasons that you talked about earlier. But just think about this. You know, in the 1950s, from Windrush onwards, right? So in the 1950s, in the 1960s, in the 1970s, in the 1980s, and in the 1990s, until Anthony Linton Blair got into 10 Downing Street, for that whole post-war period, net migration to Britain averaged 30,000 a year. Net migration to Britain is 10 times that figure. There are simply too many people coming into Britain every year. We cannot cope with the numbers. Our workers' wages are being compressed. Our schools and our education, our health systems simply cannot cope with the sheer weight of numbers. And if we remain in this European Union, given the problems in the Eurozone, given that countries like Turkey are due to join in the next few years, we will be considerably worse off, and our immigration crisis will be even worse than it is today. And if you're struggling to persuade friends or family to vote for us to leave the European Union, ask them one simple question. Do you think we should be able to control our borders and to decide who comes to Britain? And if they say yes, tell them the only way you can achieve that is to vote in this referendum, this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to leave. We must do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a story in the press today which sums up how ridiculous this whole situation is. I mean, in the Welsh press, you know, a Canadian woman marries and then cares for a terminally ill Welsh husband. He dies, and now she's being deported and sent back to Canada. But then if you're a Latvian paedophile, or a Romanian vagrant, or a Bulgarian criminal, because you're members of the European Union, you can stay. That is insane. It's wrong. It's morally wrong. And we must make a stand against this. And we can garner support within the communities from the Commonwealth in Britain to our cause by saying, look, your people are being discriminated against consistently. Because if you're from within the European Union, you have freedom of movement, but you have to jump through hoops to get into this country, through a points-based system actually. If you're from Australia, or India, or Pakistan, or Canada, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, it just simply does not work. And if we can garner support within those communities, then we have a far greater chance of winning this referendum.
Unfortunately, we have to come to our last question now, and I'm going to put it to all the panel. What can we as individuals do to help the campaign?
You go, guys. Come on, and I'll finish up.
Sorry, what can you do?
What can we as individuals do to help in the campaign?
You can sign up to go, for a start. You can talk to your friends. You can man street stalls on Saturdays in your town centres. You can write letters to the press. You can deliver leaflets. Get on board, ladies and gentlemen. We've only got a few months to go to get our country back. So here's the target. Every single one of you in here tonight, recruit at least one person when you go out. We'll double the numbers and flood Bolton with leaflets and ensure that Bolton votes to leave the European Union.
Well, now, in 2014, at the end of that second debate with Clegg, I looked into the camera and I said, I'm urging you, people out there that agree with me, to join our people's army that will take us to victory in these European elections. And the UKIP People's Army did take us to victory in those European elections, the first time in 100 years that a party that wasn't one of the big two had won a national election. And my answer to this question is, we have to build against the establishment. We've talked about it tonight. Giant multinational corporations, Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, Blair, Mandelson, Cameron, most of the cabinet, even those who probably in private would agree with us. The political class are lined up on one side, and on the other side, it is the people. This referendum, this battle, is about the people versus the politicians, about those who in their hearts and minds believe we should govern our own country, be the masters of our own destiny against the self-interest of our ruling political and financial classes. And my answer to the question is, if I called for a people's army in 2014 and I got a few battalions, this time we need divisions of the People's Army, and if we recruit them and if you help us, as Paul and others have said, whether it's delivering leaflets, whether it's manning street stalls, whether it's writing to local newspapers, whether it's ringing in to chat shows, but most important of all, to speak to your friends and your family, and if necessary, to bore them and bully them into total submission, and to drag them down to the polling station, and to say to people who normally say, I don't vote because it doesn't matter, well, this, you've got to tell them, is their once in a lifetime opportunity. This is our chance to change the course of history. This is our chance to take back our country. Join this people's army.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.